The transport ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and Captain Hyun Lee felt his stomach settle. Through the viewport, he saw the massive station floating in space. It looked like a crystal flower, with dozens of petals spreading out from a central core. Each petal glowed with soft blue light. "That's the HFY War College," Lieutenant Una Park said from the seat beside him. She pressed her face closer to the glass. 3,000 years old. Every major species in the galaxy sends students there. "And now us," Sergeant Taeyang Kim said from behind them. He didn't sound impressed. He sounded tired. 20 years ago, he had been fighting in Earth's Fifth World War. They all had been, in one way or another. Corporal Hana Choi checked her medical bag for the third time. She was nervous. Private Do Yun Sung. The youngest of them at 22 kept running calculations on his data pad. He always did that when he was anxious. The docking took another hour. When the airlock finally opened, they stepped into a world unlike anything on Earth. The corridor stretched ahead of them, wide enough for 20 people to walk side by side. The walls shifted colors slowly, from green to blue to purple. Aliens walked past them in both directions. A creature that looked like a giant lizard wearing robes approached them. Its scales were silver, and it stood at least 8 feet tall. "Welcome," it said in perfect English, though its mouth didn't quite match the words. Translation technology, Hyun realized. "I am Headmaster Torven. We are honored to have humanity join our institution." Hyun bowed slightly, the way he had been taught in the cultural briefings. "The honor is ours, Headmaster." Torven led them through the station. They passed classrooms where aliens studied holographic battle maps. They walked through gardens where plants from 100 worlds grew under artificial suns. They saw a library that stretched up for 5 floors, filled with data crystals instead of books. "The HFY War College was founded after the Great Coalition Wars," Torven explained as they walked. 60 species fought each other for 100 years. Billions died. When peace finally came, the survivors built this place. We study war so that we never forget how terrible it is. We learn strategy and tactics so that we understand the cost of violence." "Has it worked?" Una asked. "Have there been wars since then?" "Small conflicts, yes. Border disputes, trade disagreements that turned violent, but nothing like the Great Wars. The college teaches us that war should be the last option, used only when all other choices have failed." Taeyang caught Hyun's eye. They both thought the same thing, but said nothing. On Earth, war was never the last option. It was just another option, one that humans had used again and again throughout their history. Their quarters were comfortable, 5 separate rooms connected to a common area. The furniture adjusted itself to human proportions. The walls could display any environment they wanted. Do-hyun immediately made his room look like a beach. Hana chose mountains. Taeyang picked a forest. That evening, they attended the welcome ceremony in the Great Hall. 200 students from 47 different species filled the amphitheater. Humans were the only ones from Earth. Some aliens had fur, some had scales, some seemed to be made of rock or crystal. A few floated in the air, their bodies like clouds of glowing gas. Headmaster Torven stood at the center of the hall, speaking to all of them. "You are here to learn the most important lesson any civilization can know. War is not glorious. It is not exciting. It is not an adventure. War is failure. It is what happens when intelligence, diplomacy, and compassion all break down. You will study historical battles, not to admire them, but to understand what went wrong. You will run tactical simulations, not to learn how to win fights, but to see how violence spirals out of control. You will debate strategy and ethics, not to become warriors, but to become peacekeepers." The alien students around them nodded. Some made sounds that the translators turned into agreement. Hyun looked at his team. They sat quietly, faces neutral. But he knew what they were all thinking. These aliens had no idea what war really was. After the ceremony, students mingled. A bug-like creature with 4 arms approached Yuna. "I am Threx of the Kelthara," it said. Its voice sounded like clicking mixed with humming. "I will be your partner for Fleet Tactics class. I look forward to working with you." "Same here," Yuna said with a smile. A being made of blue crystal floated over to Do-hyun. "I am Ves. I study combat psychology. I am curious about human thinking. Your species is new to us." "We're curious about everyone too," Do-hyun replied. As the night went on, the humans met more of their classmates. Everyone was friendly. Everyone was excited about learning. Everyone treated the study of war like it was just another academic subject, like mathematics or history. Later, back in their quarters, the 5 humans sat together in the common room. Nobody spoke for a while. Finally, Taeyang broke the silence. "They have no idea," he said quietly. "None of them have ever really fought." "The headmaster said there were wars," Hana pointed out. "The Great Coalition Wars, 100 years of fighting." "One war. 100 years long, yes, but just one war, and it was 3,000 years ago. None of them remember it. None of their grandparents remember it." Hyun leaned back in his chair. "We ended our 5th World War 20 years ago, and those are just the big ones. We've had thousands of smaller wars in between." "Should we tell them?" Do-hyun asked. "About Earth's history?" Yuna shook her head. "They'll figure it out soon enough. Classes start tomorrow. They'll see how we think about tactics and strategy. They'll see the difference between studying war in books and learning from actual experience." "We need to be careful," Hyun said. "We're representing Earth here. Humanity's reputation in the galaxy depends on how we act." "So we play nice?" Taeyang asked. "Pretend we don't know more about warfare than everyone else here combined?" "No, we do our best. We participate honestly. But we remember why we're here. Earth wants to join the Galactic Coalition. We need allies, not enemies." Hyun stood up. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we find out what this college really teaches." The others went to their rooms. Hyun stood at the window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, with all its violence and all its beauty. Humanity had finally reached the stars, finally found other intelligent life. And the first thing they learned was that they were the only ones who truly understood war. He wondered if that was something to be proud of or ashamed of. Maybe both. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow, the aliens would start to see what humans really were. Hyun just hoped everyone was ready for that. The first week of classes was strange for all of them. The alien students treated warfare like a puzzle, something to solve with logic and mathematics. They studied ancient battles the way Earth scholars studied chess games, looking for elegant solutions and optimal strategies. Yuna's first tactical simulation came on the 3rd day. She sat in a command pod with Threx, the Kelthara student she had met at the welcome ceremony. Holographic displays surrounded them, showing a small fleet of defensive ships and a space station under their protection. Their assignment was simple. Raiders were approaching, and they had to defend the station with limited forces. Threx immediately began organizing the ships into textbook formations. "We will establish a perimeter at optimal range," the insect-like alien explained, moving ship icons on the display. "Patrol routes will cover all approach vectors. We maintain communication between all vessels. Standard defensive doctrine." Yuna watched the enemy raiders on the scan. 12 ships, moving in a loose formation. They would reach the defense perimeter in 20 minutes of simulation time. She ran calculations in her head, thinking about how real raiders would act, thinking about how real combat worked. "What if we try something different?" she asked. "Different how?" Threx's translator made the question sound curious but confused. Yuna started moving ships on the display. She pulled 3 vessels back behind the station, hiding them in the sensor shadow. She sent 2 ships forward, but not in defensive positions. She made them look damaged, moving slowly, transmitting distress signals. "What are you doing?" Threx asked. "Those ships are vulnerable. The raiders will destroy them easily." "That's the idea," Yuna said. She selected one of the cargo vessels docked at the station. In the simulation controls, she started loading it with explosives. All of the explosives. "We're going to make them think we're weak, make them confident, then we hit them when they're not ready." The simulation played out. The raiders saw the damaged ships and changed course, moving in for easy kills. They ignored the proper defensive positions because the prey looked helpless. When they got close, Yuna triggered her trap. The cargo ship, remote-controlled and packed with explosives, flew straight into the middle of the raider formation and detonated. 6 raider ships disappeared in the explosion. The 3 ships hiding behind the station came out and caught the survivors from behind. The damaged ships that had been bait suddenly weren't damaged anymore and attacked from the front. In 4 minutes of combat, all 12 raiders were destroyed. The simulation froze. The display turned red and text appeared. "Scenario complete. Victory. Unorthodox methods employed." Professors came to their command pod. One of them, a floating crystal being named Vess, spoke in a voice like wind chimes. "Cadet Park, you destroyed a cargo vessel. There were crew members aboard in this simulation." "In a real fight, those crew might volunteer," Yuna said. "One ship's crew dying to save thousands of people on the station. It's a hard choice. But war is full of hard choices." The professors looked at each other. They made notes on their data pads. Threx sat very still, not speaking. After the professors left, the Kelthara finally said, "We are taught that every life has equal value. Sacrificing some to save others is... We don't think that way." "I understand," Yuna replied. "But sometimes in combat, you don't get perfect choices. You get terrible ones, and you pick the least terrible option you can find." Word spread quickly about Yuna's simulation. By the next day, all the alien students knew about the human who had blown up her own ship to win. Tai Yang's turn came in ground combat class. The scenario was a hostage rescue. Enemies held 50 civilians in a building. Students had to plan a rescue with minimal casualties. The alien students spent hours designing elaborate plans with precise timing, specialized teams, and complex communications. Tai Yang studied the building layout for 10 minutes. Then he programmed the simulation to collapse the building. Controlled demolition, bringing it down in a way that crushed the ground floor where the hostage-takers were, but left the upper floors where the hostages were being held relatively intact. Rescue teams could then dig through rubble and save survivors. The professor stopped the simulation immediately. "Cadet Kim, you just killed everyone in the building." "No, sir," Taeyang said calmly. "I killed the hostage-takers for certain. Building collapse analysis shows 70% of hostages should survive, especially with immediate rescue operations. Every minute we spend planning a perfect rescue, those hostages are in danger. The enemy might kill them. They might move them. They might blow up the building themselves. My way guarantees the threat ends immediately. But 30% of hostages die. In a perfect rescue, maybe 5% die anyway. Things go wrong. Enemies panic and start shooting. Crossfire happens. My way saves 65% for certain right now. A perfect plan might save 95%, or it might save 0 if something goes wrong." The professor had no response to that. They marked Taeyang's solution as technically viable but ethically problematic. Hyun's simulation was a planetary invasion scenario. He ignored the enemy military completely. Instead, he targeted water treatment plants, power stations, and food distribution centers. Within 2 weeks of simulation time, the enemy population was desperate. Their military couldn't fight because they had to deal with riots and civil collapse. The planet surrendered without Hyun's forces firing a shot at soldiers. His professor, a tall lizard person, called him after class. "Captain Lee, what you did We call that collective punishment, making civilians suffer to defeat an army. I call it winning without my soldiers dying, Hyun responded. Every day my troops fight their military, I lose people. This way, the war ends faster with fewer total deaths on both sides. But the civilians are the reason the military exists. An army needs food, water, power, supplies. All of that comes from civilians. In total war, there's no real separation between military and civilian targets. Everything supports the war effort. The professor looked disturbed. We don't teach warfare that way here. I know, sir. Maybe that's why you've managed to avoid major wars for 3,000 years. You don't think about war the way people who fight real wars think about it. Similar stories emerged from Hana and Do-hyun. Hana used enemy corpses as improvised shields in a combat medicine scenario, arguing that protecting living wounded with dead bodies made tactical sense. Do-hyun presented a strategy paper arguing that destroying enemy morale through psychological warfare was more efficient than destroying their military capability. By the end of the second week, the alien students started avoiding the humans in group projects. Nobody wanted to partner with them. Their methods worked, but they were disturbing. They thought about warfare in ways that made the other students uncomfortable. In the cafeteria one evening, Hyun and his team sat alone at their table. Other students gave them space, talking quietly and glancing over occasionally. "They're afraid of us," Hana said softly. "Not physically afraid, but afraid of how we think." "We're just doing the assignments," Do-hyun protested. "We're playing by the rules. Everything we've done has been within the simulation parameters." "That's what scares them," Yuna said. "We follow the rules, but we find answers they never considered. They study war like it's history. We know war like it's—" She paused, searching for words. "Like it's part of who we are," Taeyang finished. "Because it is. Humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've tried every type of warfare you can imagine. We've learned what works and what doesn't, and we learned it with real blood and real death." "Should we stop?" Hana asked. "Try to fit in better?" Hyun shook his head. "No, we're here to learn and to represent Earth honestly. If that makes them uncomfortable, that's something they need to deal with. We're not trying to scare anyone. We're just being ourselves." Across the cafeteria, Threx watched the humans eat. The Kelthera student felt something it had never felt before in an academic setting. It felt genuine fear, not of violence, but of a way of thinking so alien it might as well have come from another reality. The humans laughed at something Taeyang said. They looked normal, friendly even. But Threx knew the truth now. Behind those smiles were minds that understood war in ways that 3,000 years of peace had made the galaxy forget, and classes had only just begun. Headmaster Torven called an emergency faculty meeting on the 16th day of the semester. 12 professors gathered in his office, representing different departments and different species. All of them looked worried. "We need to discuss the human students," Torven began. He pulled up data on a holographic display. In 16 days, they have completed 43 simulation exercises. They have won 38 of them. They have never lost by more than a narrow margin. But that's not what concerns me. "It's how they win," said Professor Vess, the crystal being who taught combat psychology. "I have been studying intelligent species for 200 years. I have never encountered minds like theirs. They see violence as a tool, not a tragedy. They follow all the rules," another professor added. This one was Kalesh, a being that looked like a floating cloud of blue gas. "Technically, they do nothing wrong, but their solutions—" "Tell us about their latest projects," Torven said. Professor Vess brought up files. Cadet Sung submitted a research paper on strategic bombing. He argues that in prolonged conflicts, targeting civilian morale through fear is more effective than destroying military assets. He supports this with detailed analysis from something called the Second World War on Earth. His calculations show that breaking civilian will to fight ends wars faster than defeating armies. Cadet Choi designed a new medical triage system, Kalesh added. It prioritizes soldiers who can return to combat over soldiers with more severe injuries. She argues that in battlefield conditions, you save the people who can keep fighting, not the people who need the most help. It's mathematically sound, but ethically, it's ruthless, Torven finished. They're all ruthless. Not cruel, not sadistic, just completely practical about violence in a way that suggests deep familiarity. Should we access their historical records? Someone asked. See what kind of civilization produced these people? I already did, Torven said quietly. He brought up Earth's history on the display. The other professors went silent as they read. Thousands of wars, hundreds of major conflicts. Weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. Earth had nuclear weapons before they had space travel. They had chemical weapons, biological weapons, weapons designed specifically to cause maximum suffering. Their military history wasn't a few major wars separated by long periods of peace. It was almost continuous conflict with brief pauses. They call them world wars, Torven said. Conflicts that involved their entire planet. They've had 5 of them. The last one ended only 20 years ago. Do you understand what that means? Every human student we have lived through a global war. They're not studying theoretical concepts. They're applying personal experience. What do we do? Vess asked. Send them home? On what grounds? They've broken no rules. They're excellent students by every academic measure. Their test scores are high. They participate in discussions. They help other students with technical subjects. The only issue is that they're too good at understanding warfare. That's exactly the issue, Kalesh said, its gas cloud form turning a darker blue. The Vorkesh War College exists to study war so we can avoid it. These humans study war so they can perfect it. They're the opposite of what this institution represents. Torven leaned back in his chair. His silver scales caught the light. I received a message this morning from the Coalition Council. They've been monitoring the situation. They want us to continue as normal but report any concerning developments. They're interested in humanity's capabilities. Interested or worried? Vess asked. Both, I think. The meeting continued for 2 more hours. They discussed options, all of them unsatisfying. In the end, they decided to watch the humans carefully and wait for the midterm crisis exercise. That would be the real test. A massive war game involving all 200 students split into 2 sides, running for 2 weeks of simulation time. If the humans were truly dangerous, that exercise would reveal it. Meanwhile, the humans were dealing with their own problems. Other students had stopped partnering with them completely. In group projects, they were politely excluded. In the cafeteria, tables emptied when they sat down. The alien students weren't hostile, just uncomfortable. It's like being the weird kid in school, Do-Yun said one night. They were all in the common room sharing a meal. Nobody wants to sit with you at lunch. We are the weird ones, Hana pointed out. From their perspective, we're the species that thinks blowing up buildings full of hostages is a reasonable rescue plan. It is reasonable, Taeyang argued. In the right circumstances. That's what they don't get. They think there are absolute rules in warfare. There aren't. There are just situations and you do what the situation requires. Maybe we should try to explain better, Yuna suggested. Help them understand our perspective instead of just showing them results. Hyun had been quiet, thinking. Now he spoke. I talked to Headmaster Torven today. He asked me about Earth's history. I told him about the world wars, about the conflicts we've fought. He seemed disturbed. What did you tell him exactly? Do-Hyun asked. The truth. That humanity has been fighting itself for as long as we have recorded history. That we've developed weapons that could destroy our whole species. That we've used chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons. That we've fought over religion, resources, ideology, territory, and sometimes just because we hated each other. The room went quiet. "How did he react?" Hana asked. "He asked me why we didn't destroy ourselves. I told him I didn't know. Maybe we got lucky. Maybe we're too stubborn to die. Or maybe we learned, slowly and painfully, that we needed to find another way." "And that's why Earth wanted to join the coalition," Yuna said. "To be part of something bigger. To have a reason to stop fighting ourselves and start working together." "Do you think they'll let us stay?" Taeyang asked. "After they learn what we really are?" Before Hyun could answer, their door chimed. Visitor. He opened it to find Threx standing outside. The Kelthera student's 4 arms moved nervously. "May I speak with you?" Threx asked. "All of you?" They let the alien in. Threx sat awkwardly on furniture designed for humans. Its translator clicked and hummed before words came out. "I need to understand something," Threx said. "When you destroyed the cargo ship in our simulation, the ship with crew aboard, did you feel anything? Regret? Guilt?" Yuna considered the question carefully. "Yes," she said finally. "I felt terrible about it, even though it was just a simulation, even though the crew weren't real. The choice still felt heavy. Then why make it? Because the alternative was worse. If I didn't use that ship, more people on the station might have died. In war, you don't get good choices. You get terrible choices, and you pick the least terrible one. That's all." "My people don't think that way," Threx said. "We believe every life has equal value. We can't rank one group of deaths as more acceptable than another." "That's beautiful," Hana said gently. "Really it is. But in a real fight, someone has to make those choices. Someone has to decide who lives and who dies, because waiting for a perfect solution means everyone dies." "Is that why your species has so many wars? Because you're willing to make those choices?" "Maybe," Hyun said. "Or maybe we have so many wars because we're not good at preventing them. We're good at fighting them once they start, but we're terrible at stopping them from happening in the first place. That's what we're hoping to learn here. How your people have kept peace for so long." Threx stood up to leave. At the door, it turned back. "The other students are afraid of you, but I think I'm starting to understand. You're not evil. You're just experienced in ways we're not, and that's more frightening than evil would be." After Threx left, the humans sat in silence. "Midterms are in 2 weeks, Do-hyun finally said. "The big war game simulation. Everyone's going to see how we really think." "Then we better be ready," Hyun said, "because after that, the whole galaxy is going to know what humanity is capable of." The war game began at dawn on the 30th day of the semester. 200 students divided into Red Coalition and Blue Coalition, each with 100 members. Headmaster Torven explained the rules in the Great Hall before the simulation started. "This exercise will run for 2 weeks of simulation time, compressed into 72 hours of real time. You will command fleets, armies, and economies. You will make strategic decisions. You will negotiate, plan, and execute operations. This is the most comprehensive exercise we offer. Your performance here determines your final grade." The humans were split up. Hyun, Taeyang, and Hana went to Red Coalition. Yuna and Do-hyun went to Blue Coalition. Both sides immediately made the same decision. Keep the humans away from important positions. Give them minor roles where they couldn't do much damage. Red Coalition made Hyun an advisor to a minor fleet commander. Taeyang got assigned to logistics and supply management. Hana became part of the medical corps planning team. On Blue Coalition, Yuna was given command of a small patrol group far from the main battle zones. Do-hyun was put in charge of communication network maintenance. The alien students thought this was smart. Keep the dangerous humans contained. Let them participate without giving them real power. They had no idea what they had just done. The simulation started. Both coalitions began with careful textbook strategies. Red Coalition established strong defensive positions. Blue Coalition focused on building up their economic base. Fleets maneuvered in predictable patterns. Ground forces deployed according to standard doctrine. Everything was going exactly as the professors expected for the first 6 hours. Then Taeyang, buried deep in logistics data that everyone else found boring, noticed something interesting. The simulation tracked supply lines realistically. Ships needed fuel, troops needed food, factories needed raw materials, and all of it flowed through specific routes and hubs. He started making small changes to shipment schedules, redirecting supplies, adjusting inventory levels. Nothing obvious, nothing that would trigger alarms. But Blue Coalition's fleet in Sector 7 started running low on fuel 6 hours earlier than expected. Their ground troops in Region 4 received rations that were technically within acceptable parameters, but lacked important nutritional elements. Small problems, annoying problems, not critical yet. Do Hyun, managing communication networks, was even more subtle. He ran diagnostic checks that everyone thought were routine maintenance. He updated software protocols that seemed like normal security patches. He reorganized data routing to improve efficiency. All standard work that no one questioned, except buried in his code were tiny changes. Delays measured in milliseconds. Routing paths that took fractionally longer. Backup systems that wouldn't quite work properly under stress. Nothing that showed up in testing. But in a real combat situation, when seconds mattered, those tiny delays would cascade into serious problems. 12 hours into the simulation, Blue Coalition's main command center experienced a strange glitch. Messages took 2 seconds longer to reach fleet commanders. Not much, but enough to make coordination harder. They spent 3 hours troubleshooting before they gave up and worked around it. Hana, working in medical planning, did something different. She built detailed files on every species in the simulation. Not their medical needs for treatment. Their vulnerabilities. Which species had weak immune systems? Which ones couldn't handle certain food preservatives? Which ones were sensitive to specific environmental conditions? She cataloged it all, cross-referenced it, and quietly shared it with Taeyang. 18 hours in, Red Coalition commanders started getting sick. Not badly, just enough to be uncomfortable. Stomach problems, headaches, fatigue. The medical teams couldn't find anything wrong. They blamed stress. But 15 senior commanders were performing at reduced capacity, making decisions slower, missing details they would normally catch. Meanwhile, Hyun and Yuna, both given minor tactical commands, were doing exactly what their superiors expected. Hyun defended his assigned sector competently. Yuna ran her patrol routes efficiently. They followed orders, made no waves, and seemed content with their limited roles. But both of them were studying everything. Every command decision, every fleet movement, every resource allocation. They were learning how their respective coalitions thought, how they planned, where their blind spots were. 24 hours into the simulation, both coalitions were confused. Nothing major had gone wrong, but everything felt slightly off. Communications were slower. Supplies were scarcer. Commanders were making mistakes they shouldn't make. Both sides blamed the stress of the exercise and pushed forward. 36 hours in, the cascade began. Blue Coalition launched a major fleet operation. It should have been a textbook maneuver, 3 battle groups converging on a Red Coalition supply depot. But Do Hyun's communication delays meant the groups didn't coordinate properly. They arrived minutes apart instead of simultaneously. Taeyang's fuel shortages meant Red Coalition's defending fleet was in the wrong position to intercept efficiently. The battle was messy and chaotic. Both sides took heavier losses than they should have. The professors watching the simulation frowned. This wasn't how trained officers should perform. 48 hours in, Red Coalition tried a ground invasion, but their troops were tired from poor nutrition. Their commanders were still fighting mysterious illnesses. Their supply lines kept having problems that looked like bad luck, but happened too consistently to be coincidence. The invasion stalled. Blue Coalition tried to capitalize, but ran into their own problems. Communication breakdowns led to friendly fire incidents. Fleet movements that should have been simple became complicated. Nothing worked quite right. 60 hours into the simulation, both coalitions were struggling. Morale was dropping. Efficiency was down 30%. Commanders were making increasingly desperate decisions, trying to force victories before their situations got worse. That's when Hyun and Yuna struck. Hyun suddenly stopped defending. He took his small fleet and attacked Blue Coalition's news networks, not military targets, media stations, cultural centers, places that had no defensive value but huge symbolic importance. He didn't destroy them. He captured them and broadcast messages designed to terrify and demoralize the civilian population. Yuna did the same to Red Coalition. Her patrol group, which everyone had forgotten about, suddenly appeared deep in Red territory. She hit civilian infrastructure, water treatment plants, power stations, food distribution centers, not to cause deaths, but to cause fear and chaos. Both coalitions panicked. They pulled forces from the front lines to deal with these new threats. Their military operations fell apart as they tried to protect their home territories. And that's when the professors realized what had happened. Headmaster Torven stood in the observation room, watching the simulation spiral into chaos. Around him, professors were frantically checking system logs, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. "It's the humans," Vess said, its crystal form pulsing with agitation. "Look at the data. Every major system failure, every mysterious problem, it all traces back to them." They pulled up the logs. Taeyang's supply chain modifications, Do-hyun's communication network changes, Hana's biological warfare through food additives, Hyun and Yuna's simultaneous attacks on civilian morale, all of it legal within the simulation rules, all of it devastating. "They weren't fighting the war game," Kailesh said, its blue gas form turning almost black with distress. "They were fighting the systems underneath it. They sabotaged both coalitions from the inside while everyone focused on the military campaign. And they did it without coordinating," another professor added. "They were on opposite sides, yet they all independently identified the same vulnerabilities and exploited them the same way." Torven made a decision. "Stop the simulation. Now." The war game froze. In the Great Hall, all 200 students suddenly found their displays going dark. An announcement came over the speakers. "All students report to the assembly hall immediately." The students filed in, confused and worried. Many were visibly distressed. The Kelthara students' psychic network was in chaos. Several Vren students had stress-shed their scales. A few students from species that changed color with emotion were showing colors that meant fear. Headmaster Torven stood before them, his silver scales dull with worry. Behind him, the 5 human students stood in a line, looking uncertain about why they had been called up front. "In 3,000 years, Torven began, his voice heavy, "the Vorkish War College has never stopped a simulation early. We have never had students require psychological counseling from a theoretical exercise. Until today." He gestured at the humans. "These 5 students fought this war game as if it were real. They sabotaged infrastructure. They spread biological agents. They attacked civilian morale. They turned the exercise into actual warfare instead of an academic study of warfare." The students in the hall looked at the humans with a mix of fear and confusion. Hyun stepped forward. "Sir, did we break any rules? Every action we took was within the simulation's parameters. We were told to win. We found ways to win." "You found ways that no one else would even consider," Torven replied. "You fought as if lives depended on it. As if losing meant death." "Isn't that the point?" Yuna asked quietly. "To prepare for real war?" "No," Torven said, and his voice was sad. "The point is to understand war well enough that we never fight one. You understand war too well already." The hall was silent. 200 students stared at 5 humans. and for the first time in the galaxy's peaceful history, they truly understood what it meant to meet a species born in violence. The emergency meeting of the Galactic Coalition Council happened 3 days after the simulation ended. Representatives from 47 species gathered in a massive chamber on the Coalition's capital station. Earth's ambassador, a woman named Ambassador Kim Ji-woo, sat in the newest and smallest chair, wondering if humanity's brief membership in the galaxy was about to end. The speaker, an ancient Vren named Council Leader Morvac, opened the session. "We are here to discuss the human presence at the Vorkish War College. The headmaster has submitted a disturbing report. We must decide what to do about humanity." The chamber erupted in debate. Some species called for Earth's quarantine. "They are too dangerous to integrate," argued the Kelthera representative. "Their minds work in ways that threaten galactic peace. We should contain them to their own system until they evolve beyond their violent nature." Others disagreed. "They have broken no laws," the Morvac's delegate pointed out. "They participated in an academic exercise. Yes, their methods were disturbing, but they were within all established rules. We cannot punish them for being different." Different? The Kelthara representative's translator made its voice sound shrill. "They weaponized food. They turned communication networks into traps. They attacked civilian morale as a primary strategy. This isn't different. This is dangerous." Ambassador Ji-woo raised her hand. Council Leader Morvac nodded permission for her to speak. "Honored representatives," she began, standing up, "I won't deny what our students did. I won't pretend that humanity doesn't have a violent history. But I want you to understand something. My species has been fighting itself for thousands of years. We have created terrible weapons. We have fought terrible wars. And 20 years ago, we nearly destroyed ourselves in our Fifth World War." The chamber was silent now, listening. "We survived that war barely. And when it ended, we made a choice. We could keep fighting each other until we went extinct, or we could find another way. When we discovered faster-than-light travel and learned we weren't alone in the universe, we saw hope. A chance to be part of something bigger than our own conflicts. A chance to use our energy for building instead of destroying." "Pretty words," the Kelthara representative said. "But your students proved that you haven't changed. Given a simulation of war, they excelled at it. That's who you are." "Yes," Ji-woo agreed. "That is who we are. We understand warfare in ways you've forgotten or never learned. We see violence as a tool because we've used it so much. But that same experience has taught us something else. War is terrible. It destroys everything it touches. We don't want to be your warriors. We want to be your deterrent." "Explain," Morvac said. "The galaxy has been at peace for 3,000 years because you built institutions like the War College. You study war to remember why you shouldn't fight. But what happens when someone doesn't care about your institutions? What happens when a species appears that hasn't learned to value peace? Or when desperation drives someone to violence?" "We would defend ourselves," a delegate said. "With what?" Ji-woo asked. "Theoretical knowledge and rusty doctrine? You have 3,000 years of peace. That's beautiful. But it also means you've forgotten how to actually fight. We haven't. We're the species that remembers, and that makes us valuable, not just dangerous." The debate continued for hours. Finally, Morvac called for a vote. The question, should humanity remain in the Galactic Coalition? The vote was close, but humanity stayed. However, there were conditions. Earth would send no more students to the War College for 1 year. The 5 human students already there would be allowed to finish the semester, but under observation, and the Coalition would send a diplomatic team to Earth to better understand human culture and history. Back at the Vorkish War College, Headmaster Torven called the 5 humans to his office. He looked tired. His scales had lost some of their shine. "The council has decided you may complete your studies here," he told them. "But things will change. The faculty has been discussing how to restructure the curriculum. We've realized our theoretical approach to studying war has left us unprepared for real threats." "You want us to teach you how to fight," Hyun said. It wasn't a question. "We want you to teach us what real warfare looks like. Not because we want to use that knowledge, but because we need to understand what we're trying to prevent. We've been studying the shadow of war. You've lived in its substance." "Headmaster," Yuna said carefully, "are you sure you want to learn this? Once you understand how we think about violence, you can't unlearn it. It will change your species." "I know," Torven replied. "But the alternative is remaining ignorant, and ignorance is dangerous when the galaxy is larger than we know. There might be other species out there like yours. Or worse than yours. We need to be ready." Over the next months, the War College changed. The humans didn't become regular instructors, but they were asked to give guest lectures. They explained concepts that made the alien students uncomfortable. They demonstrated tactics that seemed ruthless. They discussed strategy in ways that assumed war was something you could win instead of something you should avoid. But they also taught something else. Hyun gave a lecture on why nuclear weapons had prevented World War VI. Mutually assured destruction, he called it. The idea that if everyone had weapons terrible enough, no one would use them because everyone would die. It was a dark concept, but it had kept an uneasy peace on Earth for 50 years. Taeyang taught a class on proportional response and rules of engagement. How to set limits on violence even in the middle of war. How to decide what tactics were acceptable and what crossed the line into atrocity. Hana discussed medical ethics in combat. How to balance saving lives with military necessity, when to treat enemy wounded, how to maintain your humanity even when surrounded by death. Yuna and Do-hyun team taught a course on psychological warfare and why targeting civilian morale was sometimes the most merciful option. If you could end a war by breaking enemy will to fight, you saved lives compared to grinding military campaigns. The alien students found it all disturbing, but they also found it valuable. They started to understand that humanity's violence wasn't random or cruel. It was systematic and purposeful, which was somehow more frightening, but also more comprehensible. 6 months after the War Game incident, something unexpected happened. A species at the edge of Coalition space, one that had been offered membership but declined, launched attacks on Coalition trade routes. They were aggressive, territorial, and didn't value peace the way the Coalition did. The Coalition fleet responded with standard defensive procedures. They should have easily repelled the attacks. Instead, they struggled. The enemy didn't fight the way the Coalition expected. They used ambush tactics, false surrenders, and attacks on supply lines. They fought dirty. They fought the way humans fought. The Coalition called an emergency session and asked Earth for help. Not to fight, but to advise. To help them understand an enemy that thought about war the way humans did. Hyun and Yuna were pulled out of classes and sent to the Coalition fleet as strategic advisors. They looked at the enemy's tactics and immediately understood what they were seeing. They explained to Coalition commanders how to predict these kinds of attacks, how to defend against dirty tricks, how to think like someone who saw warfare as a tool instead of a tragedy. The Coalition won the conflict in 3 weeks with their guidance. Minimal casualties on both sides, because the humans taught them how to end the fight quickly rather than let it drag on. After that, everything changed again. The Galactic Coalition formally asked Earth to establish a strategic defense partnership. Human military advisors would help train Coalition forces, not to make them aggressive, but to make them prepared. In exchange, Earth got full access to Coalition technology, trade networks, and diplomatic support. At the Vorkesh War College, the 5 human students graduated with honors. Their final thesis was a joint project. Understanding violence, Why humanity's violent past makes us valuable peacekeepers. At the graduation ceremony, Headmaster Torven addressed the class. When humans first arrived, I thought they would disrupt the peace we've maintained for 3,000 years. I was right. They did disrupt it. But not by starting wars, by reminding us that peace must be actively defended, not passively assumed. They taught us that understanding war doesn't mean embracing it. It means respecting it enough to be prepared. Captain Hyun Lee stood to give the response speech for the graduates. He looked out at 200 students from 47 species, all of whom had learned to see him not as a monster, but as a teacher. "We didn't come here to scare you," he said. "We came to learn from you. Earth has spent thousands of years perfecting warfare, but we never learned how to maintain peace. That's what you've taught us. How to value cooperation over conflict. How to see other species as partners instead of threats. You've given us something precious, a reason to use our knowledge for protection instead of destruction." After graduation, all 5 humans received offers to stay as permanent faculty. They accepted. Hyun became the professor of strategic studies. Yuna taught advanced tactics. Taeyang ran the new asymmetric warfare program. Hana headed medical ethics in combat. Do-Yun became the youngest professor ever appointed, teaching psychological operations and deterrence theory. Years later, students would whisper about the human professors, about how their classes were the hardest, the most challenging, the most disturbing, but also the most valuable, because they taught something the galaxy had forgotten in 3,000 years of peace. They taught that the best way to prevent war wasn't to forget how to fight. It was to remember exactly how terrible fighting could be, and to be prepared enough that no one would dare start a conflict they couldn't win. The galaxy slept peacefully, protected not by ignorance of violence, but by those who understood it well enough to prevent it. And humanity, the species that had nearly destroyed itself with war, found their purpose among the stars. Not as warriors, but as guardians. Not as aggressors, but as the ones who remembered. The ones who understood that peace was not the absence of capability for violence, but the conscious choice not to use it. And that choice, made every day by species who knew exactly what they were choosing not to do, was worth more than 3,000 years of innocent peace. It was wisdom bought with blood and paid forward in protection, and the galaxy was safer for it.